Halloween in 2014 was supposed to be unforgettable. Back then, I was 21 years old and living in a small college town in Pennsylvania. Halloween was everything there. The streets filled with parties, drunk students, flashing orange lights, and loud music that echoed until sunrise. But there was one party everybody talked about. Ethan Carter's Halloween party. Ethan lived in a huge inherited farmhouse on the edge of town. The place looked terrifying even during the daytime. It sat far away from the other houses, surrounded by dead trees and miles of empty fields. Every year he transformed the property into something straight out of a nightmare. Fake gravestones. Burned scarecrows. Fog machines. Blood-covered mannequins hanging from trees. The guy spent thousands decorating that place. People called it the House of Masks. I remember arriving around 10 p.m. with my friends Marcus, Dylan, and Sophie. Loud music shook the walls from inside the house while people in costumes wandered around drunk in the yard. The cold October wind carried the smell of cigarettes, alcohol, and wet leaves. Something about the house already felt wrong. Not scary. Wrong. As we walked toward the front porch, I noticed 4 people standing near the tree line. They wore identical black coats. White expressionless masks. And old-fashioned hats. At first, I thought they were part of the decorations. But then one of them slowly turned his head toward me. And stared. Completely motionless. I nudged Marcus. "Do you know those guys?" Marcus looked over and laughed. Probably some theater kids. But something about them made my stomach tighten. They didn't move. Didn't talk. Didn't react to anything. Even when students stumbled past them screaming and laughing. They just stood there. Watching. I should have left right then. But I didn't. And that mistake still follows me every Halloween. Inside the house was chaos. Music blasted through giant speakers. The floors vibrated from people dancing. Fake cobwebs covered the ceiling. Someone had even built a small maze using cardboard walls inside the living room. At first, everything felt normal. Typical college Halloween insanity. But the deeper into the night things went, the stranger the atmosphere became. Around midnight, I noticed Ethan acting nervous. He kept checking the windows. Checking his phone. Walking outside. Then rushing back in. Sophie asked him what was wrong. He forced a smile. Nothing. Just making sure nobody destroys the decorations. But he looked terrified. A little later, Marcus and I went upstairs to grab drinks from the kitchen. That's when we noticed muddy footprints leading down the hallway. Fresh footprints. As if somebody had walked inside straight from the fields. The weird part? The footprints stopped directly outside Ethan's bedroom. Marcus knocked jokingly. "Yo Ethan, you hiding bodies in there?" No answer. We laughed and headed downstairs. But before we reached the bottom step, every light in the house suddenly shut off. The music died instantly. Darkness swallowed the entire house. At first everyone cheered, assuming it was part of the party. Then somebody screamed. A real scream. Not playful. Not drunk. Pure fear. Then came a loud crashing sound from the front door. People started panicking. Phones lit up everywhere. And in those brief flashes of light, I saw one of the masked men standing inside the house. Holding a shotgun. For a second nobody moved. Nobody understood what they were seeing. Then another masked man stepped in behind him. And another. And another. 4 of them. The first intruder fired a shot into the ceiling. The explosion echoed through the house like thunder. Everyone dropped to the floor screaming. One girl near the couch started crying hysterically. The masked man pointed the gun at her. Shut up. The masked men forced everyone into the living room. At least 30 people packed tightly together. Some crying. Some praying. Others completely frozen. One of the intruders dragged Ethan into the center of the room. "You own this house?" Ethan nodded immediately. The intruder struck him across the face with the shotgun. Blood splattered across the wooden floor. "Where's the money?" Ethan looked confused. "What money?" Another intruder kicked over a table. "Don't lie to us." The leader pulled out zip ties and ordered everybody onto their knees. My hands shook violently as they tightened plastic restraints around my wrists. Sophie sat beside me silently crying. Marcus whispered under his breath, "We're dead." I honestly believed he was right. One of the masked men walked around collecting phones, wallets, jewelry, anything valuable. The entire time the leader kept questioning Ethan. "You sold the product. Where's the cash?" Ethan kept swearing he had no idea what they were talking about. That's when the violence got worse. The intruders began dragging people into separate rooms. Every few minutes we'd hear screaming. Furniture breaking. Punches. Then silence. Nobody knew what was happening to the others. At one point the power suddenly came back on for a split second. And I'll never forget what I saw. One of the intruders had removed his mask. He wasn't some old criminal. He looked young. Maybe 25. Thin. Pale. Terrified. Almost like he didn't want to be there either. Then the lights died again. Suddenly Sophie grabbed my arm. "There's someone behind the couch." At first I thought she was panicking. But then I saw movement. A student hiding under the furniture. Trying to escape unnoticed. The leader saw him too. The shotgun blast shook the room. Everybody screamed. The student collapsed instantly. Blood spread across the carpet. The room became dead silent. The intruder slowly looked around at all of us. The chaos downstairs gave Marcus and me one opportunity. When two intruders dragged Ethan into the kitchen, Marcus slammed his shoulder into another hostage beside us. The distraction worked. We crawled behind the staircase and sprinted upstairs. Sophie followed us. We locked ourselves inside a bedroom near the end of the hallway. The room smelled like dust and cigarettes. We turned off the lights immediately. Nobody spoke. We could hear footsteps downstairs. Heavy boots moving slowly across the wooden floor. Then yelling. Then another gunshot. Sophie started hyperventilating. I covered her mouth gently. "If they hear us, we die." For nearly 10 minutes we stayed perfectly silent. Then the footsteps began climbing the stairs. Slow. Deliberate. Creak. 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 The hallway outside filled with shadows. Someone stopped directly outside our door. The doorknob slowly turned. Locked. For several seconds nothing happened. Then bam. A hard slam against the door. Sophie nearly screamed. Another slam. The frame cracked. Marcus whispered, "We need another way out." But there wasn't one. Third slam. The door burst open. We dove behind furniture as flashlight beams scanned across the room. I hid under the bed. Dust filled my nose. Through the hanging blanket I saw muddy boots entering slowly. The masked man searched the closet first. Then behind the desk. Then he stopped. Right beside the bed. I could hear him breathing. Slow and calm. He crouched lower. The flashlight beam moved inches from my face. I thought it was over. Then downstairs someone shouted. "We found it." The intruder immediately stood and rushed out of the room. A few seconds later all 4 masked men began running downstairs. Marcus pulled me from under the bed. What did they find? Nobody answered. Because deep down we all already knew. Whatever those men came for, they finally had it. After the intruders rushed downstairs, we followed carefully. The house had become eerily quiet. No screaming. No shouting. Only distant footsteps below us. We crept toward the basement door. And that's when we heard Ethan yelling. You said nobody would get hurt. Marcus looked at me. What does that mean? We moved lower down the basement stairs. The smell hit first. Chemicals. Rot. Something burned. Then we saw it. Hidden beneath the farmhouse was a drug operation. Large containers. Plastic bags. Stacks of cash. The intruders weren't random killers. They had come for money. And Ethan had lied to everybody. One masked man held Ethan at gunpoint while another stuffed cash into duffel bags. The leader grabbed Ethan by the throat. You stole from the wrong people. Ethan cried. I was gonna pay it back. Suddenly Sophie stepped on a loose piece of wood. Crack. Every intruder turned toward us. For one horrifying second nobody moved. Then Marcus screamed. Run. We bolted upstairs. Gunshots exploded behind us. Wood splintered beside my head. Sophie fell halfway up the stairs. I grabbed her arm and dragged her forward. The entire house became chaos again. We burst through the front door into the freezing night air. But the nightmare wasn't over. One of the masked men chased us outside. He fired another shot. Marcus collapsed near the driveway. I thought he'd been hit. But he screamed. My leg. The bullet had torn through his calf. Sophie and I dragged him toward the road while the intruder continued walking after us slowly. Not running. Walking. Like he knew we couldn't escape. Then distant sirens echoed across the fields. The masked man stopped. Turned around. And disappeared back into the darkness near the farmhouse. The police arrived minutes later. But the intruders were already gone. Vanished. Along with the money. And Ethan. The basement was empty. No drugs. No cash. No evidence. Almost like it had. The police questioned us until sunrise. Nobody could explain what happened. Most students were too traumatized to speak. The official report claimed it was a robbery gone wrong. But things stopped making sense almost immediately. First, Ethan's body was never found. Second, nobody could identify the masked men. And third, security cameras from nearby roads showed only 3 intruders entering the property. Not 4. But all of us remembered 4. Every single survivor. 4 masked men. Not 3. At first police assumed we were confused from fear. But then strange things started happening. Marcus began receiving phone calls late at night. Nobody spoke on the line. Only breathing. Sophie claimed she saw one of the masks outside her apartment window. Watching her from the parking lot. Then disappearing. I tried convincing myself we were paranoid. Traumatized. Broken. Until 3 months later. I woke up around 2 a.m. to knocking on my apartment door. 3 knocks. Slow. Heavy. I checked the peephole. Nobody. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. A distorted voice whispered. You saw too much. The call disconnected. At that exact moment. Another knock came from inside my apartment. Not the front door. My bedroom door. I froze. Every muscle in my body locked. The knocking came again. 3 slow knocks. I grabbed a kitchen knife and walked toward the hallway. The bedroom door slowly creaked open by itself. Darkness filled the room. And standing inside was a man wearing a white mask. Motionless. Watching me. I ran. I didn't even think. I sprinted from the apartment barefoot into the freezing street screaming for help. Police searched the apartment. Nobody was there. No signs of forced entry. Nothing stolen. But on my bedroom floor, they found muddy footprints. Leading nowhere. For years I tried forgetting. Tried moving on. But every Halloween, I still hear knocking. 3 slow knocks. And Samedi.